There are whispers in forgotten corners of libraries, quiet markings on faded maps, and echoes in the writings of long-dead explorers. Among these whispers is a word: Tartaria. It drifts like a faint mist through the neglected chapters of human memory. It was once a name carried across vast empires, etched onto European maps with confidence, spoken in the courts of kings and in the tents of nomads. Yet today it lies buried beneath layers of silence, obscured by official history, covered as though it had never truly existed. The story of Tartaria is not told with the fanfare of conquerors, nor preserved in monuments visited by tourists. Instead, it lingers faintly, hidden in marginal notes, in antique atlases, in the odd reference of an old book left unread. To some, it is a forgotten empire. To others, it is evidence of a great cover-up, a deliberate erasure of a civilization, too vast, too powerful, and perhaps too inconvenient for modern history to acknowledge. Tonight, we will not argue, nor prove, nor insist. Instead, we will wander quietly through the long corridors of memory, touching upon fragments of Tartaria as one might brush fingers along ancient stone walls. The journey will become soft, and without urgency. We will allow the idea of Tartaria to emerge slowly, like the dim light of dawn after the longest night. And as you drift deeper into relaxation, perhaps you will imagine a world where Tartaria still stretches endlessly, its rivers wide, its plains boundless, its cities gleaming beneath forgotten skies. Civilizations are not remembered only by the borders they drew or the battles they fought. They are remembered most profoundly by the stories they told, the myths they cherished, and the spiritual visions that shaped their lives. For in myths, one finds not only entertainment but also the deepest reflections of how a people understood themselves and their world. And though Tartaria has been silenced in history books, whispers of its spiritual life still flicker faintly, like embers glowing in the ashes of an old fire. Imagine a night on the wide steppe. A circle of yurts surrounds a central fire. The flames crackle softly, and above them stretches a sky so vast, so filled with stars, that it feels like a dome painted with silver light. Round the fire, families sit wrapped in furs. Elders speak, their voices steady and deliberate, carrying stories passed down through countless generations. These stories are not written in books. They live in memory, in song, and the rhythmic rise and fall of the storyteller's voice. Some of these stories may have told of the creation of the world, of how the earth was lifted from the waters, of how the sun and moon were placed in the sky, of how the winds were given voice. Others may have explained the patterns of the stars, the dance of the seasons, the mystery of life and death. Like many ancient peoples, Tartarians likely wove their cosmology from the fabric of the natural world around them. The rivers that gave life, the mountains that stood eternal, the storms that swept the plains. In Central Asian traditions, we hear echoes of sky worship, reverence for Tengri, the eternal blue sky, vast and boundless Father of all. We hear also of Mother Earth, the nurturing ground that supports all life. Perhaps Tartaria, stretching across lands that touch so many cultures, blended these beliefs with others: Islamic influences from the south, shamanic practices from Siberia, Buddhist whispers from the east. In this vast tapestry, spiritual life may have been a great mosaic, many threads woven together, never fully one, but never entirely separate. Picture a shaman standing alone at dawn, a drum in hand. He beats it slowly, the sound echoing like a heartbeat across the empty plain. His robes are adorned with feathers and bones, his head crowned with antlers or a headdress of cloth. His voice rises in chant, calling upon the spirits of wind and fire, river and sky around him. The land is silent, but in that silence, he hears voices, the murmur of ancestors, the breath of invisible beings, the wisdom of the unseen. Such rituals, preserved in fragments by outsiders, may have been part of Tartaria's spiritual life, binding the people not only to the land but to realms beyond. There are also whispers of myths tied to heroes and great figures, legends of riders who could cross vast distances in a single day, of queens whose wisdom guided cities, of warriors who defended the land against unseen forces. These tales, though not written, may have lived in song, their melodies carrying across plains, sung by mothers to children, repeated by travelers on long journeys. The stories may not have been meant for permanence, but for presence, not to be recorded, but to be lived in the telling. Consider also the architecture, which sometimes reveals more about spiritual life than words. The star-shaped fortresses, the domes aligned with the heavens, the strange spires topped with spheres, might these have held not only practical but symbolic meaning? Were they temples of energy, cathedrals of sky, monuments to cosmic order? We cannot know for certain, yet the shapes suggest more than mere function. They suggest belief, intention, reverence for powers larger than humanity itself. And yet, like so much of Tartaria, this spiritual life was muted, absorbed, forgotten. Some of its myths may have been rewritten under different names. Some of its rituals may have been disguised as folklore, stripped of their roots. But the spirit of a people does not vanish so easily. It lingers in lullabies, in proverbs, in the faint rhythms of dance. It survives in the quiet conviction that the world is alive, that the sky and earth are not empty, but full of meaning. As you drift into rest, imagine once more that night on the steppe. The fire glows softly, sparks rising into the dark sky. The elder's voice grows slower, deeper, like the pulse of the earth itself. The children, wrapped in blankets, close their eyes. The stars above shine as they always have, eternal witnesses to the stories below. The myths of Tartaria, though faint and forgotten, still echo in the silence, whispers carried by the wind, songs hidden in the stars. In the quiet hours of the night, imagine yourself seated at a long oak table, its surface worn smooth by centuries of scholars. Before you lies a stack of atlases, their bindings frayed, their pages carrying the faint scent of dust and ink. You carefully open one, dated from the late 17th century. The parchment is yellowed, but the lines drawn upon it are precise and delicate. There, across the northern expanse of Asia, you see it clearly inscribed in bold letters: Tartaria. Empire stretches vast, covering territories that today belong to Russia, Mongolia, parts of China, and even further. The cartographer has drawn mountains and rivers, symbols for great cities, and lines of trade routes. It is not a vague rumor on this map. It is a nation presented with confidence, as real as France, as visible as Spain. Yet, if you turn to a modern atlas, the name has vanished entirely. The land is the same, the mountains unchanged, the rivers still flowing, but Tartaria is gone, erased, as if it never existed. This absence is striking. For centuries, maps were the record of how the world was understood. To find a name so consistently present, only to disappear without explanation, leaves one with questions that whisper late at night. Did Tartaria fall? Did it dissolve into smaller states? Or was it, as some suggest, deliberately erased from memory, its story deemed inconvenient for the emerging order of the modern world? The silence surrounding this disappearance feels almost intentional. Rarely do nations so large, so prominently marked, vanish without a trail of histories, chronicles, and monuments. Where are Tartaria's ruins, its dynasties, its recorded battles? Instead, one finds gaps, blank spaces where history should stand. As you drift deeper into this thought, the candlelight flickers softly across the pages. The word Tartaria seems to glow faintly, like a memory refusing to fade. Perhaps you think this empire has not disappeared entirely. Perhaps it lingers in the forgotten archives, in the cracks of the great historical narrative, waiting for those who seek quietly enough to find it. And as the world outside grows still, the mystery of Tartaria spreads out across your imagination. Wide as the steppes, endless, as the night sky. Picture yourself in the quiet stillness of an old study room, where the wind taps gently against a small, fog-stained window. A single lantern burns on the desk, casting a soft circle of amber light. Around you are the writings of explorers, men who journeyed across deserts and steppes, through mountains and frozen rivers, leaving behind their accounts in longhand script. Their words, though faint with time, still carry the voices of those who once looked upon Tartaria with their own eyes. When we read the reports of 17th and 18th century travelers, Tartaria emerges not as myth, but as a tangible place, a realm of sprawling distances and countless peoples. Jesuit missionaries describe their journeys north of China, noting cultures and customs unlike those they had encountered elsewhere. Russian explorers, charting Siberia, speak of grand settlements, fortified towns, and complex societies scattered across lands that to Europeans seemed boundless. These were not vague remarks. They were detailed, practical notes made by men whose task was to record what they found with care. And yet, when we look for those same places in later accounts, they grow faint, their details blurred, their names altered or omitted. What once appeared firmly in the reports of travelers fades into silence, as though the world itself decided to forget. Some of these explorers' writings were locked away in archives, accessible only to scholars with special permission. Others were quietly reinterpreted, their descriptions reassigned to different nations, their mentions of Tartaria diminished to the status of rumor. Imagine, for a moment, the frustration of a modern reader turning page after page, searching for Tartaria's thread in the fabric of history, only to find it cut short. Where once the fabric was bright with color, pattern, and design, now it is a blank patch, smooth and unmarked, leaving only the memory of what might have been there. The silence, however, does not erase the echoes. You can almost hear them, the hooves of horses galloping across frozen plains, the sound of traders bartering in bustling markets, the murmur of prayers rising in ornate temples lost to time. These echoes are faint, like distant waves upon a quiet shore, but they persist. One traveler wrote of immense rivers that could only be crossed in the depth of winter, when the ice turned them into silver roads. Another described a palace with towers gleaming in the morning sun, its architecture neither fully Eastern nor Western, but something unique, a blending that suggested a civilization of its own character. Such fragments lie scattered like pearls, spilled upon the floor of history, precious and fragile, waiting to be gathered by patient hands. It is curious how human memory works. What we remember and what we forget are not always determined by importance, but sometimes by design. Some stories are told again and again until they harden into official truth. Others are whispered once or twice, then buried, their existence inconvenient to the larger narrative. Tartaria seems to belong to this latter category, a vast and inconvenient truth that slipped through the cracks of history's chosen tale. As you rest in this thought, the lantern's glow grows softer, and the night deepens around you. The idea of Tartaria becomes like a dream, half remembered, half imagined, but undeniable in its presence. You close your eyes and can almost see the caravans stretching across the horizon. Endless lines of horses, carts, and travelers moving slowly beneath a sky wide and pale with dawn, and in that vision, Tartaria is alive again, not erased, but simply waiting, resting in the still corners of memory until someone dares to listen to its echoes once more. Close your eyes and imagine walking through a silent city at dawn. The streets are wide and empty, the air cool, and the faintest mist clings to stone walls. Rising before you are grand buildings, some with domes that catch the first rays of sunlight, others with tall, ornate towers reaching toward the pale morning sky. Their designs feel familiar, yet also foreign. The arches remind you of Europe, the domes echo whispers of the East, and the intricate patterns carved into the stone seem to belong to a culture entirely its own. This, perhaps, is what the architecture of Tartaria once looked like, a blending of worlds, a style lost to history's silence. Throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, travelers spoke of cities with unusual grandeur scattered across the vast lands attributed to Tartaria. Many of these cities later became part of Russia, Central Asia, or China, their heritage absorbed into larger nations. But if we pay attention, something lingers. Photographs of unexpected towers, strange star-shaped fortresses, and impossibly vast stone buildings in places where, officially, only small rural communities should have existed. Consider the mysterious star forts, with their geometric precision and vast size. They appear across Eurasia and beyond, in Europe, Asia, and even in the Americas. Historians attribute them to military design, but the sheer number of them and the sophistication required to build them suggests something greater. Could they be the remnants of Tartarian engineering, a network of fortifications spread across continents, linked by a forgotten empire? The question lingers, unanswered, as softly as the wind through abandoned courtyards. Equally intriguing are the sudden appearances of enormous cathedrals and palatial government buildings in cities that, only decades before, were little more than trading posts. How could such feats of architecture rise so quickly with little record of the planning, labor, and knowledge required? Some claim these were the creations of Tartaria, absorbed and renamed by later rulers. Others say they were simply the product of European influence. Yet the styles do not align perfectly. They hint at something older, something deeper. The architecture speaks a language of stone and silence, wide arches, spiraling staircases, subterranean tunnels, vast columns rising with quiet majesty, buildings that seem out of place, as though they belong to another time, another civilization. These structures, scattered across distant lands, form a kind of invisible map. If one connects the dots, the outline of a vanished world begins to emerge. It is said that true civilizations leave their mark in architecture, that long after names and battles are forgotten, the stones still speak. Perhaps Tartaria's stones still stand, weathered but unyielding, hidden in plain sight, mistaken for the creations of other cultures. A cathedral in one city, a fortress in another, a tower by a forgotten river, each a surviving whisper of the grand voice of Tartaria. As you drift in thought, you may imagine walking further into this silent city. The streets grow narrower, the buildings older, vines climb across broken walls, and the sound of your footsteps echoes faintly. In one courtyard, a fountain lies still, its water long gone, but its carvings intricate, telling stories in patterns no longer understood. You pause, looking upward at the domed sky above, and you feel the presence of something larger, something enduring even in absence. Perhaps history did not erase Tartaria fully. Perhaps it only changed the names of its cities, claimed its architecture under new banners, and called the story complete. But the buildings remain patient and immovable, carrying memories that official history cannot silence. They wait for those who notice, who look closer, who let their imagination wander through forgotten corridors. And as sleep begins to draw near, you carry with you the image of a city both real and unreal, its towers glowing softly in the morning mist, its arches stretching into eternity, its silence filled with the gentle hum of what once was. In the stillness of night, as the world outside grows quiet and the only sound is the steady rhythm of your own breathing, let us imagine the people who once walked through the vast lands of Tartaria. For every empire is not merely its borders, its maps, or its architecture, but the countless lives of those who lived within it. And though history books may have silenced their names, the imagination can bring them back to life, softly, calmly, as though they are shadows moving gently across the plains of memory. When all accounts speak of Tartaria, they describe not a single, uniform people, but a great mosaic of tribes, clans, and nations. There were nomads riding swift horses across endless steppes, their yurts dotting the horizon like pale stars scattered on the grasslands. There were settled communities by rivers, fishing and farming in quiet rhythms that followed the seasons. There were traders who carried silks, spices, and metals across mountain passes, their caravans winding slowly like ants along the reaches. The diversity was vast, yet somehow united under a name that encompassed it all. Tartaria, like the Roman Empire that stretched across many cultures, or the Ottoman domains that brought together countless peoples. Tartaria too seemed to be less a single ethnicity than a great expanse of humanity, connected by geography, trade, and shared memory. Imagine, in a quiet evening, sitting by a campfire on the wide steppe, around you Tartarian families gather, their clothing woven with patterns that tell stories of the sky, the earth, and the winds. Children listen to elders recount tales of distant ancestors, their eyes wide with wonder. Horses graze nearby, their breath steaming in the cool night air. The fire crackles gently, and above, the stars shine with unbroken clarity, stretching across the heavens like a cosmic map. It is easy to forget that history is not made only by kings and generals, but also by shepherds, farmers, mothers, and children. These ordinary lives, too, were part of Tartaria, their laughter, their songs, their sorrows, all woven into the fabric of the empire, though official histories may ignore them. Though their names may never be recorded, they live, and in the quiet imagination, they live still. Some accounts describe Tartarian warriors, tall and strong, known for their horsemanship, able to ride for days across the plains without rest. Others mention scars and craftsmen skilled in architecture, astronomy, and the making of intricate metalwork. The blend of nomadic resilience and settled knowledge suggests a civilization both practical and creative, capable of surviving harsh winters and yet building cities of elegance and endurance. But more than their achievements, it is their humanity that matters. You can almost hear their songs carried by the wind, melodies simple yet eternal. You can imagine the smell of bread baking in clay ovens, the laughter of children playing beside rivers, the sound of traders bargaining in markets filled with bright fabrics and warm spices. These images, though soft and dreamlike, remind us that Tartaria was not merely a name on a map. It was lived experience. It was human life. As the night deepens, the vision of these people grows gentler. They fade not because they were unimportant, but because the world has chosen to let them fade. Yet even in fading, they leave behind traces in the architecture and the songs preserved by distant relatives, in the faint memories of traditions that still echo across Central Asia, Siberia, and beyond. Perhaps Tartaria is not gone at all. Perhaps it survives quietly in the bloodlines of millions, in customs passed down without names, in the subtle shapes of language and story. And perhaps, when we imagine these people in calm reverie, we restore them to history in the only way still possible, by remembering them softly, by allowing them to exist once more in our thoughts, in the hush of night. And so, as sleep approaches, you carry with you the image of Tartarian families gathered around fires, of children's laughter carried on the wind, of riders vanishing into the horizon, a people both forgotten and eternal, still breathing gently in the quiet corners of time. In every great civilization, there runs a pulse that is not seen on maps, yet felt in every corner of its existence. This pulse is trade, the exchange of goods, of knowledge, of stories, of cultures. If Tartaria truly spanned across the immense distances described by cartographers and explorers, then its heart must have beaten through the countless trade routes that tied its farthest edges together. Imagine a caravan moving across the wide steppes at dusk. The sky above glows faintly with the last light of day, shifting from pale gold to deep violet. Dozens of horses and camels carry loads of cloth, spices, tools, and metals. The caravan moves slowly, deliberately, a living river flowing across the land. Each traveler knows that they are part of something larger, a network of roads, trails, and paths that connect one distant settlement to another, weaving an unseen web across the empire. Tartaria lay across a strategic expanse, bridging east and west. The Silk Road is remembered as the great highway of cultural exchange, but perhaps Tartaria was the hidden steward of that network. Through its rivers and plains, its mountains and deserts, goods traveled steadily, Chinese silks reaching Russian markets, Persian spices warming the cold winters of the north, European tools finding their way into the workshops of distant artisans. Each object carried a piece of the world, and through Tartaria's lands, these pieces were stitched into a greater whole. But more than goods, there was knowledge. Alongside bolts of fabric and sacks of grain, travelers carried tales, ideas, and beliefs. Astronomical observations from one land were whispered in another. Herbal remedies known to mountain healers spread to steppe dwellers. Stories of saints, prophets, and heroes crossed borders, reshaping themselves with each retelling. Tartaria, with its immense distances, became not only a corridor of trade but also a vessel of memory, carrying fragments of the world's knowledge across time. It is often said that civilizations thrive where rivers meet. Tartaria had not only rivers of water but also rivers of trade. Picture a marketplace deep within its territory, wooden stalls covered with woven cloths, merchants calling out their prices, the scent of roasted meats mixing with the sweetness of dried fruits. Children chase each other through the alleys, while travelers from faraway lands pause to rest and bargain. A man from Persia displays fine carpets. A woman from China lays out delicate ceramics. A Russian trader offers iron tools. All of them meet in one place, their languages weaving together in a chorus of trade. If you listen closely, you might imagine the music of such a market, the rhythm of drums in the distance, the laughter of merchants as they strike a deal, the soft murmur of people speaking in many tongues. It is the music of connection, of exchange, of life itself. For what is an empire without the flow of goods and knowledge that nourishes it? Yet history grows strangely silent when asked about these networks in Tartaria. The official story often reduces the vastness of Siberia and Central Asia to wilderness, to sparsely populated emptiness, and yet the traces remain, old roads that lead to nowhere, ruins of trading posts in unexpected places, and traditions that hint at centuries of exchange. The silence feels less like absence and more like erasure, as though a bustling world has been swept under the rug, leaving behind only faint outlines. Imagine the travelers themselves, the men and women who carried these goods across thousands of miles. They must have known the land intimately, the rivers that froze in winter, the mountain passes that opened in spring, the oases that offered relief in summer. They lived by the rhythm of the earth, yet they also connected worlds. Without them, silks would not have reached Europe, nor stories of the West reached the East. They were the lifeblood of Tartaria, though their names are long forgotten. As you drift further into this vision, you might see yourself walking along one of these routes. The air is crisp, and the horizon stretches endlessly. You pass a caravan moving slowly, the jingling of bells tied to camels mixing with the soft crunch of hooves on earth. A merchant nods as you pass, and the smell of spices lingers faintly. In the air, the road seems infinite, yet comforting, for it carries you not into isolation, but into connection, into a world bound together by countless unseen threads. Tartaria may have vanished from maps, but its pulse, the steady rhythm of trade, of exchange, of movement, may still be felt if one listens closely. It hums like a distant song, soft and persistent, reminding us that behind the silence of official history lies a civilization that once thrived, alive with the motion of caravans and the voices of travelers. And in the stillness of night, as you drift closer to sleep, perhaps you can hear that hum, the quiet, eternal rhythm of Tartaria's forgotten trade routes, carrying you gently into dreams. When people speak of vanished civilizations, they often think first of cities, the places where humanity gathers, its strength builds its monuments, and leaves its most lasting marks upon the earth. In Egypt, the pyramids still stand. In Rome, the ruins of forums and colosseums whisper of old power. In Mesopotamia, the outlines of ziggurats still rise from the dust. But when it comes to Tartaria, there is silence. The cities that maps once suggested, the great settlements hinted at by travelers, seem to have dissolved into air. And yet, here and there, faint traces linger like footprints half buried in drifting snow. Imagine standing at the edge of a vast steppe, the grass rolling endlessly before you, when suddenly the land dips into the faint outlines of stone foundations. You stoop and brush away the soil to find carefully cut blocks, fitted with precision. These are not the random stones of nature but the remnants of walls. Once perhaps, here stood a city gate. Once perhaps, caravans poured through these streets, carrying silk and fur, bread and salt. The silence is heavy, but the stones whisper if you listen. Old accounts mention names of cities now forgotten. Some were said to rival Moscow in size. Others, located deep in Siberia, boasted intricate wooden architecture and markets filled with goods from across Asia. There are drawings, faint and delicate, preserved in certain archives. Towers rising from flat plains, domes glimmering, under cold skies. These images do not align with the narrative of scattered nomads living only in small encampments. They suggest something more, cities thriving in the heart of lands we are told were empty. Take, for example, the rumors of Tobolsk in Siberia, once described as a center of administration and learning, with streets wider than those in European capitals, or the curious accounts of Kazan with its blending of cultures, its mosques standing beside fortresses, its architecture bearing marks of influences not easily explained. There are whispers, too, of other cities whose names have not survived at all, but whose traces remain in ruins, in foundations, in the unexplained presence of ancient roads leading into nothingness. The absence of Tartarian cities from official history books feels intentional. Where are the excavation reports, the careful studies, the detailed descriptions of their decline? One would expect that if such cities had existed, archaeologists would speak of them with pride, as they do of Athens or Babylon. Instead, the silence continues. The silence is perhaps the loudest evidence of all. A void where stories should be. Now, close your eyes and imagine walking through one of these forgotten cities, restored by memory. The streets are paved with stone. Merchants set up stalls beneath colorful awnings. The sound of voices rises, speaking in many tongues. At the city's center stands a domed building, its spire pointing to the heavens. Children run across the square, their laughter mixing with the calls of vendors. A fountain splashes gently, its water clear and cold, offering refreshment to travelers. The city is alive, not dead, alive in the quiet imagination that refuses to let it fade completely. There is something profoundly human about cities. They gather us together, they preserve our labor, they allow us to leave behind monuments that outlast our lifetimes. If Tartaria had such cities, as so many accounts suggest, then their absence from modern narratives raises a simple but haunting question. Why erase them? Why cover them? Why bury them beneath silence? Perhaps the cities are still there, disguised under new names, their Tartarian identity forgotten but their stones still standing. Or perhaps they lie beneath layers of earth, waiting for the patient hands of future generations to rediscover them. For now, they live in memory, in whispers, in the still corners of imagination where silence speaks louder than words. As you rest, let the vision of these great, silent cities linger. Imagine them not as ruins, but as living places, filled with warmth, with trade, with human voices. Allow the streets to unfold before you in dreamlike clarity, until sleep carries you gently across their thresholds. When we imagine empires, we often picture crowns and armies, palaces, and banners. But beneath all of these lies something older, something deeper, the land itself. For no civilization can rise without soil, water, forests, and mountains. The spirit of the land is the foundation upon which every society rests. And if Tartaria once stretched across the wide steppes, the icy rivers, the forests of Siberia, and the deserts of Central Asia, then its very soul must have been bound to nature in ways both practical and spiritual. Close your eyes and picture a dawn across the steppe. The grass bends gently in the wind, waves of silver and green rippling as far as the eye can see. A river glitters faintly under the morning sun, winding like a ribbon across the endless plain. In the distance, mountains rise, their peaks veiled in mist. It is a landscape that humbles the heart, vast, quiet, infinite. To live here was to live with nature, not against it. The people of Tartaria, as fragments of accounts suggest, were deeply connected to the rhythms of the earth. Nomadic tribes followed the migrations of animals and the cycles of grass. Settled communities planted crops by the rivers, their lives guided by the seasons. Hunters moved silently through forests. Fishermen set nets in icy waters. Shepherds tended flocks beneath open skies. Each life was shaped by the land, each tradition born from its gifts and its challenges. But beyond survival, there was reverence. Ancient songs and rituals tied people to the forces around them. The wind was not only weather, but a voice. The rivers were not only water, but lifelines. The mountains were not only stone, but guardians. In many traditions across Central Asia and Siberia, traditions that may echo Tartarian roots, the land itself was sacred, animated by spirits, remembered through stories, honored in ceremonies. Imagine a festival held on the wide plains. Families gather, yurts form a circle, fires are lit, a shaman stands at the center, wearing robes embroidered with symbols of sun and moon. He raises his voice, calling upon the sky, upon the earth, upon the rivers to bless the people. The crowd listens, the children quiet, the air filled with smoke and song. It is a moment of communion not only between people but between humanity and nature. Such rituals, whispered in fragments of old chronicles, remind us that Tartaria may have seen itself as a civilization woven directly into the fabric of the earth. Even in architecture, this connection may be seen. Some ruins full alignments with the stars, suggesting an awareness of the heavens. Others are positioned by rivers or lakes in ways that hint at more than practicality, a sense of harmony, of balance. Perhaps Tartaria built not only to control nature but to join with it, to honor its patterns, to live within its flow. Modern narratives often describe the lands of Tartaria as harsh, empty, unforgiving. And yet, to those who lived there, they must have been alive, abundant, and sacred. Harshness becomes beauty when one learns to live with it. The icy winds of winter carry strength. The deserts teach patience. The forests teach silence. In every challenge lies wisdom, and perhaps the people of Tartaria carried that wisdom deeply in their daily lives. Imagine walking through a forest at twilight, guided by a Tartarian hunter. He moves silently, his steps light, his eyes attentive to every sound. He pauses by a tree, touches its bark gently, and whispers a word of respect before moving on. To him, the forest is not empty, it is alive with presences seen and unseen. You follow him quietly, feeling the same sense of reverence, the same awareness that every leaf, every stone, every stream is part of a greater whole. In such ways, Tartaria may have lived in balance, its people aware that to survive across such vast lands required not dominance, but harmony. And though history may have erased their names, this lesson lingers, that human life is inseparable from the earth, that civilization is but a reflection of the land it inhabits. As you drift towards sleep, hold this image softly, a vast plain, under a starlit sky, the wind carrying the scent of grass, the quiet murmur of rivers in the distance, the faint glow of fires where families gather. It is the land itself breathing, and through it. Tartaria lives still, eternal in silence, eternal in memory. Every empire falls, but usually it falls with a sound. Rome left behind ruins, chronicles, and echoes in every European language. Babylon collapsed. Yet its bricks and broken temples still rise from the desert. The Maya saw their cities overgrown. But the jungle could not fully conceal their pyramids. Civilizations vanish, but traces remain, ruins, records, fragments that scholars puzzle over for centuries. Tartaria, however, seems to have slipped away with almost no sound at all. 1 century. It is on the maps, confidently drawn by European cartographers. Another century. It is gone, erased as though it never existed. The silence is striking, almost deliberate, as though a curtain were pulled across the stage of history, hiding the actors mid-performance. Why did this happen? Was Tartaria absorbed by rising empires, its name dissolved into that of Russia, China, and other powers? Was it destroyed by war, plague, or natural disaster? Or was it, as some believe, deliberately erased, its memory too dangerous, too inconvenient to survive? The erasure is not complete. Small hints remain, old maps with the word Tartaria written boldly across Eurasia, accounts from travelers who describe vast lands, great cities, and proud peoples, fragments of architecture that feel older, grander, and stranger than their supposed builders could have managed. Yet these fragments are scattered, like pieces of a puzzle with half the image missing. The suddenness of Tartaria's disappearance troubles the mind. A civilization so vast should have left behind chronicles, epic poems, genealogies of kings, libraries of scrolls. Instead, there is almost nothing. The silence feels less like natural loss and more like intentional forgetting. It is as if history itself turned its face away, deciding to look elsewhere, to speak of other empires, and to consign Tartaria to shadow. Imagine a vast library, its shelves filled with scrolls and books written by Tartarian scholars. Then imagine, one by one, those shelves emptied, the scrolls burned, the books locked away, the language itself dismissed as unworthy of remembrance. The room grows empty, dust settles, silence takes the place of voices. Such an image may not be far from the truth, for in many years victors have erased the pasts of those they conquered. Why should Tartaria be any different? But silence itself can be evidence. When a story is too quiet, one wonders why. When a name vanishes too suddenly, one wonders who decided to erase it. When ruins are unexplored, when maps are dismissed, when questions are discouraged, one begins to sense the outline of a cover-up. It is not proof, but it is presence, the presence of absence, the weight of what is missing. Close your eyes and imagine the moment of vanishing. A mapmaker, once writing Tartaria across the expanse of Asia, now told to use new names. Instead, a scholar, once speaking of Tartarian peoples, now told to file his notes away. A traveler, once describing a great city, now told that such descriptions were exaggerations. One by one, the threads are cut, and soon the tapestry itself unravels. By the time centuries pass, Tartaria exists only as a faint whisper, a ghost of a name, a puzzle for the curious. Perhaps this silence was not only political but also cultural. As nations rose and modern borders hardened, there may have been little room for a vast, undefined empire that stretched across them all. To tell of Tartaria would be to tell of connections, overlaps, and shared heritage, and perhaps it was easier to erase, to divide, to claim separately. In this way, the disappearance of Tartaria may not have been sudden destruction, but slow erasure, carried out in silence until nothing remained. As you drift deeper into thought, you realize that sometimes silence itself is the loudest story. Tartaria's vanishing speaks not only of what was lost but of the strange, deliberate effort to make it forgotten. And though the silence is heavy, you can still listen to it. Hear its whispers in the faint lines of old maps, in the neglected ruins in the songs that survive only in fragments. And so, in the quiet hours of night, Tartaria lives again, not in books or monuments, but in the imagination, in the refusal to let silence be the final word. When a memory disappears, there is always a hand behind it. When a voice falls silent, there is always someone who chose not to hear. History does not erase itself. Pages are torn out. Names are crossed away. Monuments are toppled. And so if Tartaria has been forgotten, the question rises gently, persistently, who silenced it? And why? Imagine again the maps of Europe in the 17th and 18th centuries. Across the north of Asia, one finds the word Tartaria written boldly, confidently, as though it were as real as France or Spain. Then, within a century, the name vanishes. The land remains. The rivers still flow, the mountains still rise. But the name is gone. Such a disappearance cannot be explained by mere accident. It suggests a decision. Some believe that the erasure was the work of rising empires, Russia above all. As the Russian Empire expanded eastward, swallowing Siberia and beyond, the lands once marked as Tartaria came under its control. To claim these lands, perhaps it was easier to erase their former name, to fold them quietly into Russian identity, to speak no more of Tartaria. The empire grew, and the silence grew with it. Others point to China, whose dynasties extended their influence over Mongolia and Central Asia. For them, too, it may have been inconvenient to acknowledge a vast neighbor that no longer fit the political order. Better to speak of their own dominion, to redraw maps in their favor, and to allow Tartaria's memory to fade. But perhaps the cover-up was broader still. Europe, in its march of colonialism and enlightenment, may have found Tartaria too confusing, too immense, too unclassifiable, a land so vast, a people so diverse. It did not fit easily into the neat categories that scholars preferred. And so, perhaps, Europe too chose to forget, to erase, to focus on the empires it could understand, leaving Tartaria in the margins until even the margins disappeared. And yet, beneath these political explanations lies a deeper possibility. What if Tartaria was erased not only for convenience, but for secrecy? What if it carried knowledge, technologies, or cultural legacies that others wished to suppress? What if its very memory was a threat to the narratives that modern powers wished to construct? In such a case, erasure was not simply neglect, it was deliberate concealment. Picture, for a moment, a council of scholars and rulers gathered in a dimly lit chamber, maps spread across a table, candles flickering, shadows dancing against the walls. They lean close, voices hushed. One points to the word Tartaria written across half a continent. Another shakes his head. This name must vanish, he says. From this point forward, it will no longer exist. These lands belong to us. Their stories will not be told. And with a sweep of the pen, the name is erased, replaced, forgotten, at least officially. History, after all, is written by those who have the power to write it. And when an empire falls, its memory often falls with it. What makes Tartaria unusual is not that it was forgotten, but that it was so thoroughly forgotten, its silence deeper, its absence wider, its traces more carefully covered. The thoroughness suggests intention. Perhaps the reasons were many: political absorption, cultural simplification, suppression of inconvenient truths. Perhaps no single hand silenced Tartaria, but many, each adding layers of forgetting, until nothing was left but faint whispers. And yet, those whispers remain. They persist in maps, in ruins, in traditions that survive against the odds. They refuse to die completely because memory, like water, finds a way to seep through even the tightest cracks. As you rest, imagine this: a name erased from the map, but still glowing faintly beneath the ink, a story buried but still murmuring beneath the soil, a silence imposed, but never complete. Tartaria may have been erased, but in the quiet imagination, it survives. And perhaps that survival is its greatest resistance, a presence that no empire, no ruler, no scholar could fully extinguish. When a civilization disappears from maps, when its name is erased from books, when its monuments crumble, it may seem as though it is lost forever. But the truth of humanity is that memory is stubborn. Stories linger where stones fall, songs endure where cities collapse, customs outlive the kings who once commanded them. And so, while Tartaria may have been silenced in official histories, its spirit may yet survive, hidden not in archives or museums, but in the living traditions of the people who walk the earth today. Imagine traveling through Central Asia, the heart of what was once marked as Tartaria. In the evenings, when the sky glows with fading light, families gather in their homes in yurts or simple houses. The elders begin to sing, their voices low, steady, melodic. The songs are old, older than anyone can remember. They tell of riders crossing endless plains, of heroes who spoke with the wind, of cities whose domes gleamed like the sun. No one calls these songs Tartarian, they are simply traditions. Yet in their notes, in their words, the echoes of a forgotten empire may still be heard. Folklore is perhaps the most resilient vessel of memory. It does not depend on parchment or printing presses. It travels in the breath of storytellers, in lullabies sung to children, in dances performed at weddings and festivals. In the lands once called Tartaria, there are tales of sky gods and earth mothers, of spirits who guard rivers and forests, of ancestors who ride on the backs of eagles or who whisper through the snow. These stories are not labeled with the name of an empire, yet they carry its essence, the worldview of a people who lived in harmony with vast landscapes, who measured time not in years but in seasons and migrations, even in small customs. Tartaria may survive. The way a yurt is constructed, with its circular walls and its opening to the sky, reflects a cosmology that places the heavens above and the family at the center. The design is practical, but also symbolic, a living echo of a belief system that ties humanity to the universe. In food, too, traces linger. Breads baked in clay ovens, fermented drinks brewed from mare's milk, recipes passed down through countless generations. They may not carry the name Tartarian, but they carry the memory of lives once lived within its bounds. Consider language as well. Words migrate, shift, and transform, but some hold fast. Across Eurasia, linguists find curious overlaps. Words that seem out of place, yet appear in distant languages, as though carried by ancient traders or by the migrations of forgotten peoples. Could these fragments be the linguistic fingerprints of Tartaria, scattered like seeds across continents? It is a gentle possibility, one that reminds us that even silence can be bridged by whispers. In certain festivals, too, we glimpse shadows of Tartaria, the great gatherings of nomadic peoples, where wrestling, horsemanship, and music fill the days, feel less like modern inventions and more like ancient echoes, in the way the horse is honored, in the way the sky is revered, in the way fire is treated as sacred. There may live fragments of a worldview once shared across the empire's vast lands. It is easy to overlook such survivals. Scholars may classify them as folklore, anthropology, or local custom, never connecting them to the possibility of a great forgotten empire. But for those who listen gently, patiently, the connection begins to form. The customs feel too widespread, too consistent, too enduring to be mere coincidence. They feel like threads of a tapestry once vast, now unraveled, yet still visible in its scattered strands. Imagine yourself attending one such festival in a small village. The air is filled with the sound of drums and stringed instruments. Riders race across the plain, their horses swift and graceful. Dancers move in circles, their steps echoing ancient patterns. Children laugh as they chase one another through the crowd. The elders sit together, nodding, remembering, keeping watch over traditions older than any of them. You stand among them, and though the word Tartaria is never spoken, you feel it in the rhythm, in the music, in the firelight. You feel the survival of something that refuses to be erased. Perhaps this is Tartaria's greatest legacy, not its monuments, not its borders, not its rulers, but its spirit, carried quietly in the traditions of people who live without knowing that they preserve an empire's memory. For empires may vanish, but humanity's songs are harder to silence. As you rest tonight, let these echoes surround you. Hear the songs carried on the wind, taste the bread of countless generations. Feel the warmth of fires that have burned for centuries. Tartaria lives there still, not in books or maps, but in the simple persistence of human tradition, in the quiet, enduring heartbeat of culture. History can erase names from textbooks. It can silence the voices of storytellers. It can even crumble stone into dust. But maps are stubborn things. Once ink has been pressed onto parchment, once a name has been written across mountains and rivers, it lingers, and though the world may change its story, the old maps still remain, tucked away in libraries, preserved in collections, waiting for those who care to look. When one opens an atlas from the 17th or 18th century, the surprise is immediate. Across the northern reaches of Asia, spanning from the Ural Mountains to the Pacific Ocean, one sees the name boldly inscribed, Tartaria, not a small province, not a vague territory, but an empire so vast that it stretches across half the known world. To the west lies Muscovy, to the south lies Persia, to the east lies China, and above them all, Tartaria, filling the space like a silent giant. These maps vary in detail. Some show great cities marked by symbols of towers and domes. Others depict rivers cutting through wide plains, mountains rising like spines across the land. In some, the word Great Tartaria appears, suggesting a distinction between different regions. Little Tartaria in Crimea, independent Tartary in Central Asia, Chinese Tartary near the Great Wall. It is as though cartographers felt the need to classify its immensity, to break it down into comprehensible pieces, but still the name remains too large to ignore. And then, as centuries pass, the name fades. Later maps show Siberia, Mongolia, Kazakhstan. The lands are divided, absorbed, renamed. Tartaria vanishes, as though the ink itself had been washed away. Yet the earlier maps are still there, tucked quietly in archives, reminding us that once the world acknowledged a name now forgotten. Why does this matter? Because maps are not merely drawings. They are mirrors of how the world was understood at a given moment in time. If Tartaria was consistently placed on maps by European cartographers, it means that it was not a rumor, not a myth, but a recognized reality, something acknowledged, something known. The erasure, therefore, is all the more striking. It is not as though Tartaria never existed, but rather that the world chose to stop remembering it. Imagine a quiet library, its walls lined with tall shelves. The smell of leather and old paper fills the air. You pull down a massive atlas, its cover worn, its pages yellowed. You spread it open on a table. And there is the word Tartaria stretching across the north of Asia. Your fingers trace the ink, and for a moment, the silence of centuries lifts. You can almost see the caravans crossing the steppes, the towers rising on the horizon, the fires burning in yurts beneath the stars. The map becomes a doorway, a passage into a world that official history has tried to lock away. Cartographers were not careless. They recorded what they knew, what travelers told them, what merchants confirmed, what explorers reported. To dismiss Tartaria as a mere mistake is to dismiss centuries of geographical effort. Perhaps the details were imperfect, as all maps of their time were, but the persistence of the name across so many atlases suggests something solid, something undeniable. And so, the maps that refuse to forget become evidence. They are not proof in the strictest sense, but they are stubborn reminders. They whisper, quietly but firmly, there was once an empire here. You may deny it, you may erase its name, but the ink remains. As the night deepens, imagine yourself surrounded by these old atlases, their pages open, their ink glowing softly in candlelight. Each map tells a story not only of land and river, but of memory itself. The silence of Tartaria may weigh heavy, but the maps resist. They hold the word in place. They keep the name alive. They preserve a fragment of the truth. And so, as you close your eyes, you may carry with you the image of vast parchment pages, the sound of quiet turning paper, the sight of the word Tartaria, stretching across the world like a dream that refuses to vanish. Civilizations often end not with conquest, but with catastrophe. The fall of Pompeii was not caused by invading armies, but by the sudden fury of Mount Vesuvius. The collapse of ancient coastal towns came not from politics, but from floods, earthquakes, and the slow shifting of the earth itself. Nature, vast and unpredictable, has always had the power to erase what human hands have built. And when we look for Tartaria in the silence of history, one theory emerges quietly, like the sound of distant thunder. Perhaps it was destroyed, not erased, by disaster. Imagine, if you will, a great city standing upon wide plains. Its towers gleam in the sunlight, its markets hum with the voices of merchants, its streets echo with the laughter of children. Then, suddenly, the sky darkens, the rain begins, not a gentle rain, but sheets of water pouring from the heavens. Rivers swell, breaking their banks. Streets become torrents, houses buckle, walls collapse. Within days, the city is drowned, its memory buried beneath mud and silt. To those who survived, perhaps nothing remained but sorrow, silence, and the long task of wandering elsewhere. Legends from across Eurasia tell of great floods, of waters rising to swallow entire kingdoms. Among Siberian peoples, there are tales of villages washed away in storms that lasted for weeks. In Central Asia, songs speak of valleys turned into lakes, of ancestors fleeing to mountains. Even in Europe, chroniclers mention unusual floods, sudden shifts in climate, winters so severe that whole regions were left barren. Could it be that Tartaria, stretched across so many climates, faced a series of such disasters, floods, fires, and storms, that weakened it beyond recovery? Some whisper of earthquakes, too, reshaping the land. The earth trembles, buildings fall, rivers change their course. A once thriving city is left stranded, its lifeblood cut off. Others speak of firestorms, of lightning striking wooden cities, of entire districts reduced to ash. In times before modern firefighting, a single spark could consume everything, and so a memory could be lost not to armies, but to flame. And then there is the strange theory of mud floods. Stories of entire cities half buried, their lower floors hidden beneath layers of earth, as though swallowed suddenly by the ground itself. Walk today in certain old towns, and one finds buildings whose windows lie below the level of the street, doors half buried, cellars that seem once to have been full floors. Some claim this is evidence of a catastrophe, a flood of earth and water that swept across the land, covering cities and leaving only their upper levels visible. Was Tartaria undone not by conquest, but by nature's hand, a great mud flood that smothered its memory beneath silence and soil? Whether legend or truth, the possibility is haunting. A people can survive war, they can rebuild after invasion, but to face the endless waters, the trembling earth, the consuming fire, such disasters leave wounds too deep to heal. Survivors scatter, stories blur, memory dissolves into myth. An empire may vanish not by erasure alone, but by the sheer force of the natural world. Picture yourself standing at the edge of an abandoned settlement. The ruins lie half buried, their stones peeking out from beneath layers of soil. Grass grows over broken walls, wildflowers bloom where streets once ran. To most, it is nothing, just another ruin. But if you listen closely, if you imagine gently, you may hear the echo of waters rushing, of voices crying, of silence descending. You may feel that here long ago, disaster struck, and an empire faded with it. Even in catastrophe, though there is memory, survivors carry stories, pass them on to children, weave them into songs and rituals. Perhaps that is why so many flood legends exist across these lands. Perhaps that is why so many customs honor water, fire, and earth, because they were once forces of both life and destruction. And so, as you drift into sleep, let the image form softly in your mind, a city of Tartaria, quiet beneath the stars, then suddenly washed by waters, its towers sinking, its streets silenced. Above the flood, survivors climb to higher ground, carrying with them only memory, only story. And though the empire may vanish beneath mud and time, its whispers live, still, like ripples upon the surface of forgotten waters. When a civilization falls, its ruins often remain, stones lie scattered in the dust, inscriptions weather slowly in the wind, statues tilt and crumble, but knowledge is less visible. Knowledge can vanish without a trace if no one remembers it, if no one writes it down, if no one dares to speak its name. And yet, sometimes knowledge does not disappear. Instead, it is taken, adopted, absorbed, its origins forgotten, but its substance enduring in new hands. This may be the true fate of Tartaria. Its buildings may have crumbled, its name may have been erased, but its knowledge may still flow quietly through the veins of other empires, hidden in plain sight, unacknowledged, unnamed. Consider architecture first. Across Eurasia, we see buildings that rise suddenly, inexplicably, in places where there was little foundation for such grandeur. Cathedrals with domes that seem almost Eastern, yet not quite. Government halls whose vast scale feels disproportionate to the cities around them. Rail stations, built in the 19th century, so ornate and advanced that they seem older, wiser than their supposed architects. Could these be Tartarian inheritances? Structures claimed under new names, their true builders forgotten. Then, consider technology. The star-shaped forts, with their intricate geometry, appear everywhere, from Europe to Asia to the Americas. Historians assign them to military engineers, but perhaps the designs were borrowed, inherited from a tradition that once belonged to Tartaria. The same may be true for aqueducts found in unexpected places, for underground tunnels whose purpose is unclear, for towers capped with strange spheres that look suspiciously like energy devices. Were these truly new inventions, or were they legacies quietly absorbed, stripped of their Tartarian identity? Knowledge can also be absorbed through stories and science. Some astronomical observations that later appeared in Russian or Chinese records may, in truth, have come from Tartarian scholars. Herbal remedies, folk medicine, and healing practices may carry roots in Tartarian traditions, even if they are now attributed elsewhere. Maps of far-off lands may have been compiled with information gathered by Tartarian explorers, though the name is missing from the margins. Imagine, for a moment, a vast library in the heart of Tartaria. Scrolls and books line its shelves. Records of the stars, treatises on building, instructions for healing, poems of heroes, and myths of creation. Now imagine that library seized, its contents divided, its scrolls carried away to Moscow, Beijing, Istanbul, or European capitals. The books are studied, translated, copied. The knowledge survives, but the name does not. Tartaria fades, yet its wisdom lives on, disguised as the property of others. History provides many examples of such absorption. The wisdom of Greece was preserved by the Arabs. The heritage of Egypt was claimed by Rome. The traditions of countless tribes were folded into the cultures that conquered them. Why should Tartaria be any different? It may be that its knowledge was too valuable to destroy, but too inconvenient to acknowledge. Better to use it quietly, to benefit from it, while erasing the name of the people who created it. Picture yourself in a quiet study, surrounded by old manuscripts. Some bear Russian script, others Chinese characters, others Latin. Yet as you read them, a pattern emerges, similarities, echoes, shared ideas that seem too consistent to be coincidence. You realize that perhaps they all point back to a single source, a single forgotten fountain of knowledge. Tartaria. The words are disguised, but the voice beneath them whispers faintly, patiently, refusing to be silenced. There is a quiet irony in this possibility, for though Tartaria's memory was erased, its wisdom may live still in the very civilizations that denied it. Every dome that rises, every fortress that stands, every story that echoes, they may all be Tartarian, though the name is hidden. The empire may have been buried, but its mind, its ideas, its genius, these may have endured, traveling silently across centuries. And so, as you drift deeper into rest, let this image settle softly. The spirit of Tartaria, not dead, but living, invisibly, its knowledge carried by others, its wisdom hidden in plain sight. Though the empire has no name, it has left fingerprints everywhere, quiet, subtle, enduring. When we think of forgotten empires, we often picture ancient ruins, carvings on stone, faint traces left thousands of years ago. But Tartaria is different. Its story of true lingers not in the distant past but on the edge of modern memory, in an era when cameras had already begun to capture the world. And so, among the archives of the 19th century, scattered in dusty boxes and faded albums, there are photographs that seem to whisper of something out of place, structures, cities, and images that hint at a forgotten world. Close your eyes and imagine a sepia photograph from the mid-1800s. The image is faded, its corners curled, but the subject is clear, a city square. At its center stands a building vast and ornate, with domes and towers that rise into the sky. The streets around it are nearly empty, a few carriages, a handful of people. The building seems far too grand for the setting, as though it belonged to a far larger and older city. Historians may label it a cathedral or a government hall, newly built by local rulers. Yet something about it feels older, more enduring, as though it had stood there long before the photograph was taken. In archives across Europe and Asia, one can find such images, photographs of towns whose buildings appear disproportionately vast, whose stonework seems too advanced, whose details defy the notion that they were merely provincial outposts. In Siberia, for example, photographs show cities with wide boulevards, neoclassical facades, and intricate ornamentation, cities that official history claims were little more than remote settlements. To the time, how then did such grandeur emerge in places said to be poor, isolated, or undeveloped? Some theorists whisper that these are not new constructions at all, but remnants, Tartarian structures, inherited and repurposed, photographed just before their true origins were forgotten. The photographs become evidence not of new beginnings, but of endings, the last glimpses of a civilization fading into silence. There are also images of strange fairs and exhibitions, especially in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. World's fairs in Europe and America displayed enormous buildings of plaster and stone built in record time and then demolished as though they were temporary. Yet when one looks closely at the photographs, the buildings seem far too vast and detailed to have been temporary at all. Towers, domes, arches, and palaces, all photographed, all real, and then gone. Were these exhibitions a way to reassign Tartarian architecture, to claim it under new banners, to rewrite its story before dismantling it? The thought lingers like smoke in the mind. Even in portraits, there are hints. Groups of people stand stiffly before cameras, dressed in furs, robes, or uniforms that blend east and west. Their faces are strong, their eyes steady, their clothing marked with patterns unfamiliar to modern nations. Who were they? Local villagers, or Tartarians captured in the last days of their empire? Photographs can freeze a moment, but they cannot tell the whole story. Sometimes the silence between the lines is louder than the image itself. Imagine, now, walking through a quiet gallery of such photographs. The frames are worn, the glass smudged, but the images remain. City streets half empty yet dominated by colossal buildings, towers with spires that resemble energy devices, People standing in front of ornate facades that seem far older than the dates written on the captions. You walk slowly, from image to image, feeling as though you are piecing together a puzzle that someone once tried to scatter. The silence of these photographs is haunting. They do not shout, they do not explain. They simply exist, stubbornly, like the old maps, each one a fragment of memory, each one a door into a world that official history insists never was. Yet the eyes of the people, the stones of the buildings, the lines of the streets, they all tell a different story. Perhaps, then, Tartaria's final breath was captured not in words, but in images, photographs, that were never meant to reveal a secret, but that now stand as unintentional witnesses. They are the frozen moments of a civilization on the brink of erasure, preserved not by intention but by the quiet persistence of the camera. And so, as you drift toward sleep, imagine these photographs glowing softly in the darkness, sepia tones, faded corners, vast buildings, solemn faces. They whisper without words, they endure without explanation, and in their silence, Tartaria still lives quietly, stubbornly, refusing to vanish completely. The 19th century is remembered as the age of industry, steam engines puffing clouds of white smoke, railways cutting across continents, iron bridges spanning mighty rivers, cities glowing with the new light of electricity. It was an era of invention and progress, of factories and machines, of humanity reshaping the very world with gears and fire. But in the quiet shadows beneath this triumphant narrative lies a question. What had to be forgotten in order for this story to be told? If Tartaria truly existed as an empire of vast scope, with architecture, technologies, and traditions of its own, then its erasure may not have been accidental. It may have been necessary. Necessary to clear the stage for the story of industry, for the narrative of modern progress that demanded a clean break from the past. To claim that modernity was born fresh, without ancestors, perhaps it was easier to sweep Tartaria into silence. Consider the great world fairs of the late 19th century. These exhibitions presented humanity's achievements with dazzling displays, vast palaces, intricate domes, endless rows of inventions. And yet, many of these buildings were torn down shortly after the fairs ended, as though they were never meant to endure. The official explanation is that they were temporary, made of plaster and wood, yet the photographs tell another story. Buildings far too vast, too detailed, too permanent to have been mere decorations. Were these fairs a way to reassign Tartarian architecture, to display it as though it were newly built, and then to erase it before questions could be asked? Railways, too, carry whispers of this story. Across Siberia, vast stretches of track were laid in astonishing time. The Trans-Siberian Railway, celebrated as a marvel, seemed almost impossibly fast in its construction. Could it be that parts of the network already existed, remnants of Tartarian engineering, merely claimed and expanded upon by modern powers? It is speculation, but one that lingers. For the speed of progress often hides forgotten foundations. Even electricity has its shadows. In the early 20th century, inventors like Nikola Tesla dreamed of wireless energy, of towers that could broadcast power through the air. His designs, curious and unfulfilled, resemble the strange spires seen atop some old buildings, towers whose purpose is officially dismissed as decorative. Were these two inheritances, relics of Tartarian knowledge, disguised beneath new stories? Perhaps the age of industry was not entirely new, but rather a rebirth, a repackaging of older knowledge given new names. Imagine standing in a 19th century city, the air filled with the hiss of steam and the clang of iron. Around you, factories rise, chimneys pour smoke into the sky, yet here and there you notice older structures, domes, arches, towers, their style out of place, their purpose unclear. The people around you hurry past, concerned only with machines and progress. But you pause, sensing that these older buildings are not relics of a forgotten medieval age, but fragments of something more recent, more silenced. The industrial age feels less like a beginning and more like a takeover, claiming not only land, but memory itself. It is in silence that erasure works best. As the world celebrated locomotives and telegraphs, the old names were quietly removed from maps. As factories roared to life, the stories of Tartaria were quietly set aside. As progress marched forward, questions about who built the immense buildings standing in remote cities were left unanswered. Modernity was not simply invention, but also forgetting, the deliberate covering of what came before. Perhaps this was why Tartaria had to vanish, to allow the story of progress to be clean and triumphant. The world required a blank slate, an empire that had mastered its own forms of architecture, energy, and trade would complicate that story. Better to erase it, to bury it, to fold its achievements into others. And so, Tartaria became silence, while the industrial age became memory goddess. You drift now into stillness. Imagine the hum of factories blending with the faint whispers of older voices. Imagine the smoke of chimneys curling above domes that no one explains. Imagine the glow of electric light flickering against stones carved long before. The modern age may have tried to erase Tartaria, but in its shadows, the empire still lingers. Not gone, not silent, but hidden beneath the noise of machines. When we think of empires, we usually imagine boundaries, lines drawn on maps, borders patrolled by soldiers, the limits of power marked by walls or rivers. Rome had its limes. China had its Great Wall, Persia its frontiers. Yet there is another way to think of civilization, not as a fortress, but as a network, not as a single nation, but as a web of cities, knowledge, and trade that stretches quietly across the world. Some whisper that Tartaria may not have been a local empire at all, but part of something greater, a civilization without borders, spread across continents, its memories scattered and disguised. Imagine the star forts, geometric and precise, scattered across Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Americas. Official history tells us they were invented and spread by European engineers. Yet their number is astonishing, their similarity too consistent, their distribution too wide. Could they be remnants of a shared architectural tradition, once belonging to a civilization that spanned far more than one continent? Could they be Tartarian, or part of what some call the Old World Order, a civilization older and broader than we are told? Consider also the strange similarities in architecture. Domed buildings, arches, and spires appear across cultures said to be unrelated. In Moscow, in Istanbul, in Delhi, in Mexico City, in Washington, D.C., we find echoes of the same styles: columns, rotundas, towering domes aligned with the heavens. Are these coincidences, or survivals of a forgotten unity, a shared design? Language inherited from a lost civilization. Even myths carry hints of connection. Flood stories appear everywhere, in Siberia, in India, in Mesopotamia, in the Americas. Tales of giants, of sky gods, of civilizations destroyed and rebuilt, they echo from one land to another, familiar yet strange. Could these myths be fragments of a shared memory, distorted by distance, preserved in song? If Tartaria was part of a global civilization, perhaps these stories are its legacy, scattered like seeds across the earth. Trade routes, too, suggest more than we realize. The Silk Road is well known, but beneath it may have been an even older web of exchange, evidence of distant contact, coins found far from their homelands, plants cultivated across oceans, tools that travel beyond their origins. All hint at a network broader than official history allows. Perhaps Tartaria was not isolated to Eurasia, but a steward of this global web, a node in a civilization that connected the world long before the modern age. Imagine standing on a shore, watching a fleet of ships glide across the horizon. They are not the fragile boats we are told of, but strong vessels capable of carrying people and goods across oceans. On board are traders, craftsmen, and scholars, carrying not only goods but knowledge, architecture, medicine, astronomy. They dock in distant lands, build cities, exchange stories. No single empire controls it. Instead, it is a civilization of cooperation, of shared memory, of quiet unity. Could this have been Tartaria, not just an empire, but part of something greater, something global? The thought is unsettling because it challenges the story we are told. Modern history speaks of separate civilizations, rising and falling independently, connected only later by exploration and colonization. But what if the world was connected long before? What if Tartaria was the forgotten evidence of that connection, erased to preserve the narrative of modernity as the beginning of true global exchange? The silence surrounding Tartaria becomes even heavier in this light, for to admit its existence would be to admit that the world was once more unified, more advanced, more connected than we are told. To acknowledge Tartaria would be to rewrite not only the history of Eurasia but the history of the world. And so, perhaps, the name was erased, the memory scattered, the story left untold. As you rest, imagine the world not as divided, but as whole. Imagine domes rising in cities across continents, star forts gleaming in distant lands, caravans crossing steppes, ships crossing oceans, all part of a single hum of civilization. Imagine Tartaria as one thread in this tapestry, its name forgotten, but its presence enduring, and perhaps, in dreams, you may walk through this world again, a world without borders, connected not by conquest, but by memory. Civilizations leave many kinds of footprints. Some are visible: walls of stone, towers of marble, roads worn smooth by countless feet. Others are less tangible, yet no less enduring. Words, sounds, patterns, and symbols often survive long after empires vanish. They travel in the mouths of traders, in the songs of shepherds, and the carvings of artisans. They cross borders unnoticed. They cling to memory even when names are erased. And so, if Tartaria was once vast, if it touched so many lands, then perhaps it still lingers in the quiet traces of language and the hidden signs carved into the world. Consider first the spread of certain words. Across Eurasia, there are terms whose origins are puzzling, whose presence in distant tongues seems too curious to ignore. A word for fortress in one language echoes a similar sound in another thousands of miles away. A word for horse, central to life across the steppes, appears in forms familiar across cultures said to be unrelated. Could these be remnants of a Tartarian tongue, dispersed by traders, preserved by nomads, buried in vocabularies where no one thinks to look? Languages are living rivers. They carry stones and seeds from far-off places, and though scholars may assign them categories Slavic, Turkic, Mongolic, Indo-European, the truth is often more fluid. Tartaria may not have had a single language, but rather a family of tongues, a mosaic of dialects that shared roots and borrowed freely. This mosaic could have been the quiet glue that held together an empire too vast to be uniform, an empire that lived not in armies, but in the steady hum of communication. Now think of symbols. Walk through old cities in Central Asia, Russia, or even Europe, and you will find them. Geometric patterns carved into stone, star shapes, circles, spirals, sunbursts. Some are dismissed as mere decoration, others assigned to local traditions. But their repetition across vast distances raises questions. Why do the same shapes appear in buildings separated by thousands of miles? Why do star-shaped patterns echo in both fortresses and embroidery? Why do spirals, suns, and interwoven lines appear so consistently, as if speaking a language beyond words? Perhaps these were the sacred symbols of Tartaria, a visual script that bound together its people across vast lands. Like the hieroglyphs of Egypt or the runes of the Norse, they may have carried meanings now forgotten, symbols of protection, of harmony, of energy. Some whisper that the star forts themselves were not merely military, but symbolic, designed according to cosmic geometry, blending function and meaning into one. Imagine, for a moment, a marketplace in Tartaria, Merchants exchange goods, but also symbols, carved on coins, woven into fabrics, painted on low carts. A child runs through the crowd with a toy marked by a sunburst. An elder blesses a newborn with a spiral drawn in ash on the forehead. A craftsman carves stars into the beams of a house. Not for beauty, but for memory. These symbols, scattered across generations, might survive even when the empire itself is gone, quietly persisting in folk art and clothing, in the very architecture of villages. Even alphabets carry traces. Some researchers point to old scripts that seem to appear suddenly, their origins unclear. Were they inventions of their time or inheritances from something older? Cyrillic, Arabic, Persian, Chinese characters, each has its own history. But perhaps beneath them all lies a forgotten layer, a written tradition of Tartaria now buried, its fragments dissolved into other alphabets, its letters lingering only in hints and shapes. As you reflect on this, imagine walking through a museum, quiet and dimly lit. Glass cases hold fragments of pottery, cloth, carved stone. You lean closer and see familiar shapes, stars, spirals, suns. The plaques give them local names, but you sense a larger story, a pattern unspoken. Each object feels like a syllable of a forgotten language, each carving like a letter of an unwritten alphabet. Together, they hum softly, a chorus of memory that refuses to fade. The beauty of language and symbols is that they resist erasure. Empires may vanish, libraries may burn, cities may collapse, but words travel with people, symbols hide in art. Patterns persist in tradition. If Tartaria was silenced, perhaps it still speaks, not in the bold lines of maps, but in the quiet presence of a shared word, in the persistence of a spiral, in the star that appears again and again, carved into wood and stone. As you drift into the calm of night, let these hidden voices surround you. Imagine the whispers of forgotten words, the glow of old symbols etched into stone, the hum of a language that survives in fragments. Tartaria may be gone, but in words and signs, it still speaks, softly, patiently, waiting for someone to listen. Every civilization has its temples, not always grand, not always carved in marble or stone, but always present, for wherever humans live, they lift their eyes to the sky, they bow to the earth. They honor what they cannot fully see. Egypt left pyramids, Greece left columns, India left temples of stone carved with endless detail. If Tartaria was once vast, then surely it, too, had sacred spaces, places where the people gathered to honor the unseen, to mark the rhythms of life, to touch the eternal dot. And though Tartaria's name has been erased, faint traces remain. A church dome that looks oddly Eastern, a mosque whose foundations seem older than its minarets, a monastery perched on a mountain, its walls thicker and older than the monks who dwell there. In many lands once marked as Tartaria, one finds sacred structures that feel out of place, as if they belong to another age, another people. Official history may assign them to later rulers, but their bones, their foundations, whisper of something deeper. Consider the domes across Eurasia, from Moscow to Samarkand, from Kazan to Irkutsk. One sees them round, gleaming, rising toward the sky. Some are Christian, some Muslim, some Buddhist, yet beneath their differences lies a shared shape. The dome, symbol of heaven, of eternity. Was this shape a gift of Tartaria? A sacred design carried across faiths, adopted by all, yet owned by none? Then there are the star forts, which some claim were not only military but spiritual, designed according to sacred geometry aligned with stars, functioning as both fortress and temple. Their patterns resemble mandalas, circles within circles, suggesting not only defense but devotion. Could it be that Tartaria understood architecture as sacred, that every city, every wall, every tower was a temple as well as a structure? Sacred practices also leave echoes in custom. In Central Asia, shamans still drum and chant, calling upon sky and earth. In Siberia, rituals honor spirits of animals, forests, rivers. In the steppes, festivals celebrate the sun, the turning of seasons, the renewal of life. These traditions, scattered and renamed, may be fragments of Tartaria's sacred life, living on quietly in the rituals of people who never heard the empire's name. Imagine entering one of these sacred spaces at twilight, a circular tent, smoke rising from a fire at its center. Around you, elders chant softly, their voices weaving together in low tones. Symbols are drawn in ash on the ground. Patterns of stars and spirals. Outside, the steppe stretches endlessly, but inside, the circle feels infinite, as though the sky itself has bent down to listen. You sit in silence, not needing to understand, only to feel. This is the sacred heart of Tartaria, not gone, but echoing in memory. Religion, too, may have been a tool of erasure. As Tartaria's lands were absorbed by Russia, China, and others, new faiths were imposed, new names given to old temples, new rituals layered upon ancient ones. Yet erasure is never complete. Beneath Christian prayers, Muslim calls, Buddhist chants, there may still beat an older rhythm, a Tartarian rhythm faint but unbroken. Sacred spaces are stubborn. They endure because they are tied not only to stone, but to place. A hill that once held a Tartarian temple may now hold a church. A river bank where rituals were performed may now be crossed by a bridge, but the place remembers. And the people, even if unconsciously, continue to honor it. Memory lives not only in words, but in soil and water, in the quiet pull of sacred ground. As you rest, imagine walking through one of these sacred sites. The walls may bear the marks of later builders. The symbols may be hidden beneath layers of paint, but you can still feel it, the echo of older prayers, the presence of forgotten rituals, the hum of Tartaria's sacred heart. In silence, you listen, and in listening, you remember. Every civilization has its voice, and that voice is often expressed through its art, sometimes through brushstrokes on parchment, sometimes through carvings on stone, sometimes through melodies carried by wind and string. The voice of Tartaria, if we listen carefully, may not be entirely lost. It may linger in faint patterns in old songs, in traditions that still hum quietly across Eurasia. Imagine standing in a small museum far from the great capitals of the world. Its rooms are dim, its displays modest, its walls lined with objects that seem ordinary at first glance. A carved wooden chest, its surface decorated with swirling patterns. A woven rug, its designs geometric and precise, repeating stars and spirals. A bronze ornament shaped like a horse, stylized yet elegant. None of them are labeled as Tartarian. Each belongs officially to some local culture, some provincial tradition, yet taken together, they form a chorus, faint but insistent, as though whispering, "We are fragments of something greater." The art of Tartaria may have been practical, as well as beautiful. The yurt, with its circular frame and its lattice of wood, is itself a kind of living sculpture, functional, portable, yet elegant in its geometry. The embroidery sewn into clothing was not only decoration, but storytelling, carrying symbols of sun, sky, and earth. Metalwork, too, bore both purpose and beauty. Intricate horse bridles, tools etched with patterns, weapons adorned with lines that seem more ritual than warlike. And then there is music. Across the steppes, one still hears the strains of long, drawn-out melodies played on instruments, such as the dombra or mourn core. These sounds are haunting, both sharp and soft, echoing the vastness of the land. They feel ancient, older than the nations that now claim them. They may be Tartarian, or at least echoes of Tartarian songs, carried across centuries in the breath of shepherds, in the voices of storytellers, in the lullabies sung by mothers to children. Picture a quiet evening in a Tartarian settlement. A fire burns in the center. Families gathered in a circle. A musician begins to play, the notes rising slowly, as if pulled from the earth itself. The melody drifts outward, across the plains, rising to the stars. Children sway with the rhythm, Elders close their eyes and remember. The music is not written, not preserved in books, but lived, carried in memory, passed from ear to ear, from heart to heart. Such music may have survived even when the empire did not embed it in tradition, disguised as folk song, yet carrying the voice of a forgotten world. The silence of museums, the persistence of folklore, the beauty of surviving crafts, these may all be Tartaria's art, hidden in plain sight. Official history has no chapter for Tartarian painting or Tartarian sculpture, but art does not need chapters. It survives wherever people create, wherever beauty is woven into life. Perhaps Tartaria's legacy is in the persistence of patterns, in the stubborn survival of motifs that cannot be erased. Even architecture may be seen as art. The vast domes, the ornate arches, the mysterious star forts, they are more than structures, they are expressions. They embody a vision, a harmony of form and meaning, whether in stone or wood, whether in cities or villages. Tartarian art may have always been about connection between earth and sky, between people and spirit, between memory and the present moment. As you drift into rest, imagine the soft notes of a step instrument echoing across a twilight plain. Picture rugs woven with endless stars, chests carved with spirals, ornaments glimmering with patterns of sun and moon. See the firelight dancing on walls decorated with forgotten symbols. Feel the hum of a civilization that may be gone in name, but that still breathes in art, in music, in culture. Tartaria speaks softly still, not through history books, but through beauty that endures. Every land carries its legends. Some speak of dragons, others of gods, others of heroes too strong to be real. But across many parts of the world, in Europe, in Asia, in the Americas, there lingers one curious and consistent myth, the tale of giants, towering figures, strong beyond belief, said to have built great works that ordinary humans could not. And when we think of Tartaria, erased and forgotten, we must ask, could these myths be memories, faint and distorted, of a people whose presence has been concealed? Old chronicles sometimes mention them quietly. Travelers wrote of burial mounds in the steppes so large they seemed fit only for beings taller than men. Farmers digging in fields reported bones of unusual size, dismissed by scholars as those of animals, though some swore they were human. Even in architecture, the suggestion lingers. Doors taller than necessary, ceilings higher than comfort requires, stones so massive that their placement defies explanation. These whispers fuel the idea that Tartaria may not have been an empire of ordinary scale, but one inhabited, or at least remembered, as the land of giants. Imagine standing before a great stone wall. The blocks are so large you cannot imagine how they were moved. The official stories tell you they were crafted by known rulers, by known civilizations. Yet in your heart, you feel the strangeness. The stones are too vast, too heavy, too perfect. You wonder if these walls are Tartarian, not merely walls of an empire, but echoes of a people whose strength was legendary. Folklore across Eurasia tells of tall ancestors, beings closer to the sky than to the earth. Some describe them as benevolent guardians, builders of cities, teachers of knowledge. Others cast them as destructive, too powerful, swept away by floods or divine punishment. In either case, they are remembered as real, not just symbols, but presences. Could Tartaria's erasure have been in part the erasure of these beings? Consider also the myths of other lost peoples. In Siberian legends, there are tales of underground dwellers, hidden races who vanished into the earth. In Central Asia, stories tell of shimmering beings who came from the mountains, offering wisdom and disappearing again. In the Arctic, some tribes speak of strangers taller, paler, or darker than themselves, who vanished into the snow. These stories, scattered and diverse, might all be fragments of Tartaria's mosaic, pieces of memory reshaped into myth. Even in Europe, echoes persist. In medieval manuscripts, Tartars were sometimes described not only as warriors, but as mysterious, almost superhuman figures. Their horsemanship was legendary, their endurance unmatched, their numbers vast, perhaps exaggeration, or perhaps an echo of something real, a people whose scale, whether physical or cultural, was larger than the world wished to remember. Imagine, now, a quiet night on the steppe. The stars glitter above, the grass whispers in the wind. On a fire, a grandmother tells children a story of a time long ago when giants walked the earth, when their footsteps shook the ground, when their hands raised towers that still stand. The children listen wide-eyed, glancing toward the horizon as if expecting those towering figures to return. The story is old, passed through countless generations. The empire may be gone, but the memory of its people lingers, transformed into legend. Skeptics may dismiss these stories as exaggeration, as metaphor, and perhaps they are, yet myths often carry seeds of truth buried in metaphor, distorted by time. If Tartaria's people were not literal giants, perhaps they were giants. In another sense, giants of knowledge, of skill, of culture, giants whose presence was too vast to be ignored, and yet too inconvenient to be remembered. As you rest, hold softly the image of these forgotten beings. Imagine them walking across wide plains, their shadows long beneath the sun, their hands lifting stones into place, their voices carrying across the wind. Whether real or myth, they are part of Tartaria's memory, part of the whispers that survive when all else is erased. Giants of stone, giants of story, giants of silence. When a civilization vanishes, its stones may crumble, its temples may fall, its songs may fade into silence. But true erasure requires something more. It requires not only the destruction of what is visible, but also the reshaping of how people think. It requires rewriting memory itself. And if Tartaria was truly once vast, then perhaps the greatest cover-up lay not in the fall of its cities, but in the quiet redrawing of history, through schools, through books, through the stories that shape the minds of each new generation. Imagine a child in the 19th century seated at a wooden desk in a classroom. The teacher holds up a map. It shows the continents, their borders drawn clearly. The child studies it with curious eyes. But on this map, the word Tartaria is gone. In its place are new names: Russia, Mongolia, China, Kazakhstan, Siberia. The teacher explains these nations with confidence, as though they had always been there. The child nods, learning a story that does not include Tartaria at all. The memory ends here, with a silence disguised as truth. History, after all, is not merely discovered, it is taught, and those who control the teaching shape the memory of the world. If Tartaria was erased from textbooks, if its name was omitted from lectures, if its ruins were dismissed as something else, then within a few generations, it would be as though it had never existed. What remains in libraries may gather dust, but what remains in minds fades quickly when no one repeats it. The rewriting of memory is subtle. A building is explained as Russian, though its style feels older. A legend is called local folklore, though it may be an echo of something greater. A map is labeled outdated, though its words once spoke of Tartaria. Each change seems small, but together they weave a new tapestry. And in that tapestry, Tartaria is missing. Consider the power of textbooks across the world. They tell children who their ancestors were, which empires rose and fell, which names matter, which do not. They do not usually lie outright. Instead, they omit, they leave blank spaces where stories once stood. They smooth the rough edges of history, presenting a neat line of progress, ancient, medieval, modern. In this line, there is no room for Tartaria, and so its memory dissolves, not by force, but by silence. Imagine the teachers themselves. Perhaps some knew of Tartaria, saw its name on old maps, wondered about its traces. Yet to keep their positions, to align with accepted knowledge, they taught what they were told. The silence became tradition, the omission became fact, and soon even teachers forgot. What began as concealment became ignorance. passed down generation by generation. Education is one of the strongest tools of power. Empires have always used it to shape loyalty, to rewrite the past in their favor. Rome taught its children of Roman glory, not of the tribes it absorbed. Colonial powers taught of their civilizing mission, not of the cultures they suppressed. And so too modern nations may have taught of their own greatness, while erasing Tartaria, folding its lands and people into their own stories. The result is what we live with now, a silence so complete that even to mention Tartaria feels strange, like invoking a ghost. And yet the old maps remain, the ruins remain, the whispers remain. They sit uneasily beside the neat stories told in classrooms like shadows on the edge of memory, reminding us that the rewriting was never perfect. As you drift into thought, picture a quiet library late at night. A student studies a history book, its pages filled with dates and names. But on the shelf above, unnoticed, lies an atlas from 2 centuries earlier, with Tartaria written boldly across half a continent. The student never opens it. The book remains closed, dust gathering on its spine. This is how memory is rewritten, not by destroying every trace, but by ensuring that no one looks where the traces still are. Perhaps Tartaria was not destroyed at all. Perhaps it was covered, layer by layer, until its name no longer fit the story the world wished to tell. And perhaps the greatest cover-up was not in wars or disasters, but in the quiet voices of teachers, the silent pages of textbooks, the lessons repeated until forgetting felt like truth. And so, as you rest, let this thought settle gently. Memory can be erased, but it can also be rediscovered. The silence of Tartaria is heavy, but within it lies a question, a possibility, a faint glow. And in that glow, the empire breathes still, waiting for those who dare to listen. Silence can endure for centuries. Names can be erased from maps, stories can be cut from books, ruins can be left to crumble unnoticed. And yet, silence is never absolute. Eventually, someone asks a question, someone looks where others have been told not to look, someone sees a shadow where there should be none. And in our own time, Tartaria has begun to stir again, not in textbooks or classrooms, but in curiosity, in the quiet persistence of those who refuse to let the past remain buried. The modern age, with all its technology, has given us new tools for remembering. Old maps that once lay hidden in libraries are now digitized, scanned, and shared. A researcher in one country can open a file online and see Tartaria written across Eurasia, bold as day. Undeniable, old photographs, once tucked in dusty archives, can now be studied by anyone, revealing buildings too vast, too ornate, too mysterious to match their official stories. Step by step, fragment by fragment, the silence begins to crack. The internet, for all its noise, has become a vessel of memory in forums, in quiet corners of discussion. People share images of old maps, photographs of half-buried buildings, accounts of strange legends. They ask questions that history avoids. Why did this name vanish? Why do these structures feel older than they should? Why do so many cultures carry echoes of the same forgotten story? There are no easy answers, but the act of asking itself is powerful. Curiosity is the antidote to silence. Imagine a scholar seated at a laptop late at night. The room is dark except for the glow of the screen. They scroll through images of antique atlases, comparing one to another. In each, the word Tartaria appears. Their eyes widen. They turn to modern maps, where the name is gone. The scholar leans back in silence, sensing that something has been hidden, something vast. They may not publish a paper, they may not prove anything, but the spark of curiosity has been lit, and that spark spreads. Even ordinary people, without academic titles, have begun to notice. A traveler photographs a cathedral in a small Russian town and wonders why it is larger than anything nearby. A villager digs a cellar and finds a door buried beneath the earth, suggesting that the building was once taller, that the ground itself rose to cover it. A child asks why an old family story speaks of ancestors from Tartaria when no such nation exists on modern maps. These are small questions, but together they weave a chorus. The return of curiosity is not always comfortable. Official history often dismisses such questions as foolish, conspiratorial, unworthy of study. Yet the questions persist, like water dripping on stone. They do not fade, because they arise from something real, the stubborn survival of fragments, too sharp to ignore, and so slowly the silence that once covered Tartaria begins to loosen. Perhaps this is how memory always returns, not with a sudden revelation, but with whispers, fragments, patterns noticed by those willing to see. Each old map opened, each ruin examined, each story retold brings Tartaria back a little more. It may never be fully restored, never regain its place on modern maps, but its presence grows stronger, like a melody long forgotten, now hummed again. In the quiet of night. As you rest, imagine standing in a quiet study surrounded not by silence, but by discovery. Maps spread across a table, photographs pinned to walls, books open with marginal notes. The air hums with the soft energy of curiosity. Outside, the world may not notice, but inside, the memory of Tartaria glows steady, patient, alive. Curiosity has returned, and with it, the empire begins to breathe again. When one follows the trail of Tartaria, what is most striking is not what is found, but what is missing. The silence itself becomes evidence. Maps that once spoke boldly, now mute. Cities that appear too grand for their supposed histories. Legends that whisper of giants and floods, yet never make their way into textbooks. Photographs of structures explained away, ruins that no one excavates, symbols that no one interprets. Again and again, we find absence, and in that absence, presence. Tartaria lingers like a shadow. It cannot be touched directly, but its outline is unmistakable. It hovers at the edges of maps, glows faintly in the carvings of old buildings, echoes in the songs of steppe musicians, and hums quietly in the questions of modern seekers. It is both nothing and everything, both erased and enduring, both gone, and still here. Imagine the empire as a vast tapestry. Once it was bright, woven with countless threads of language, art, trade, and belief. Over time the tapestry was unraveled. Some threads were cut, some hidden, some woven into other fabrics. What remains is scattered, a fragment of design here, a piece of color there. To most, it looks like scraps. But if one is patient, if one gathers the pieces, a pattern begins to emerge. Not complete, not perfect, but unmistakable. The memory of Tartaria, the persistence of shadows, is itself a kind of resistance. Despite all the forces that sought to erase it, empire, conquest, disaster, silence, Tartaria refuses to vanish completely. It survives in questions, in curiosity, in the stubborn endurance of fragments. Perhaps this is the true legacy of the empire, not power, not conquest, not monuments, but memory that refuses to die. Picture yourself standing at twilight on the endless steppe. The horizon glows faintly with the last light of day. The wind moves softly through the grass. In the distance, you see ruins, faint outlines of stone walls, domes now broken, towers leaning. They seem lifeless. Yet as the stars emerge, you begin to sense something else, a presence, not visible but felt, a hum, not heard but known. The land remembers. The silence remembers. The shadow of Tartaria persists, and perhaps that is enough. For even if the empire never returns, even if its name remains absent from maps, its persistence in shadow challenges the neatness of official history. It reminds us that the world is larger than we are told, that memory is deeper than we imagine, that silence itself can carry truth. As you drift toward sleep, let this image carry you, a world where shadows breathe, where ruins whisper, where forgotten empires still walk quietly beside us. Tartaria may be erased, but its shadow endures, and in that shadow there is peace, there is wonder, there is the quiet hum of eternity. And so we come to the end of this long passage through shadows and silence across 25 segments. We have wandered through old maps, forgotten ruins, faint songs, vanished cities, floods, myths, and the quiet persistence of memory. Have not found answers carved in stone, nor proofs written in ink, but perhaps something gentler, something deeper. The awareness that history is not as fixed, not as certain, not as complete as we are told. Tartaria remains a whisper, a name erased, yet still visible on old maps, a story untold, yet present in legends, a silence imposed, yet cracked by curiosity. We may never know if it was truly an empire vast and mighty, or a symbol of something greater, or simply the echo of human imagination. But perhaps that is not the point. Perhaps the point is that it teaches us to listen more carefully to the ruins, to the symbols, to the silences themselves. Civilizations rise and fall, but memory flows differently. It seeps through cracks, it hides in folklore, it hums in music, it lingers in architecture that feels too large for its time. Memory resists erasure, and in that resistance, Tartaria endures. Not as a nation we can chart, but as a reminder. The world is full of forgotten stories, and sometimes the greatest cover-up is not destruction, but silence. Imagine yourself now, resting in the calm of night. The steppe stretches before you, endless and quiet. Above, the stars shine as they always have, ancient witnesses to all that has been. In the distance, you see faint lights, perhaps campfires, perhaps cities long gone, perhaps only the glow of memory itself. You breathe deeply, and the air is cool, carrying with it the soft hum of forgotten empires. Sleep comes gently, carrying you through this vastness. And as you drift, you realize Tartaria is not gone. It lives in whispers, in shadows, in dreams. It lives in the quiet spaces of history, where those who listen with patience can still hear it breathing. And perhaps that is all we need, not certainty, not proof, but the soft comfort of knowing that nothing is ever truly lost.